I'm Tom Hyland. I write about Italian wines and other wines. I've been writing for 20 years. And I'm joined by a fellow journalist today from Rome, Antonio. Move back to your camera there. We can't see you. Antonio Di Spirito. This is my friend Antonio Di Spirito from Rome. He's going to help ask a few questions today in Italian. Antonio Capaldo, we're losing your picture there. Okay, perfect. Anyway, the two of us today are going to talk to our friend Antonio Capaldo, who is the proprietor of Feudi di San Gregorio, one of the most famous and most celebrated wineries in Campania and really in all of Italy. So, Antonio, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you. And thank you to Antonio as well.
Great. Well, we missed out on a few minutes there, but we'll try and run it. We'll try and stay with the hour and continue getting as much information as we can. So first question I have is how is the season coming along? How are the vineyards looking?
You know, in this difficult year, actually, luckily the nature is counterbalancing all the rest. So we are experiencing a very nice vintage so far because we've been enjoying heat, but also cooler nights, in particular at the beginning of April. So the spring phase is going very well. Of course, it's too soon to say, but let's say it's proceeding quite well for this 2020, which we all hope for a number of obvious reasons to make this vintage a remarkable one. No?
I would agree. I think that's true for about everybody everywhere. So, yeah. We've known each other, I think, for like 15 or 16 years. I don't remember exactly the first time we met, but I've followed your wines for a long time. And we'll go through your current releases a little bit later on. Antonio has some questions for you about a number of things. I want to start with Campania. And of course, specifically, we're talking about Irpinia, which is where you make your greatest wines. And I know when your father and his partners started the winery in 1986, Irpinia and Campania, the wine industry, it was a very different place than what it is today. And I think there's been an explosion of wineries over the last 15, 20 years, but back in 1986, that was not the situation. And I would say that certainly that your father and his work and his partner's work and your work, you've been one of the innovators down there in Campania and have helped this explosion. So could you talk a little bit about that change over the last 30 or so years?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for your kind words, of course. But, Irpinia has an incredible tradition for viticulture. So even if there were not many producers, transforming wine and bottling wine 30 years ago, viticulture has been in our area for a long time for obvious reasons, because you have wonderful climate, cooler climate, actually mountain climate, rather than the typical southern climate, volcanic soils for most part of our areas. And you also enjoy indigenous varietals that have been there since ancient times. So for a number of reasons, you have a good combination of elements. But as you were saying correctly, up to, let's say, 30 to 40 years ago, there were 5, 6, really a bunch of producers, among them master grapes into wine and trying to market and bring these wines around the world. So when we started in 86, we were the 6th winery to bottle actually wine. And now there are approximately 150. So the context changed dramatically. There are more players, there is more experience, there is more knowledge sharing. So I believe that now is an exciting time, because even if our varietals have been there forever, it is true that now we have a number of people working on them with different expertise, different approach that really can share knowledge and try to improve at the end of the day the quality of what we do in the area. So I would say we are blessed by nature. At the same time, we are now in a moment of our history as a region that is probably the best to try to produce quality.
Well, I would agree with that. And I certainly think that in Italy, especially in Italy, but otherwise, people who just study Italian wines, there's always this attention paid to the wines of the north, of Piemonte, and Tuscany is more the central north, and the south just doesn't get a lot of respect. And as you mentioned before, your climate is not the typical southern one. It's much cooler. You get a lot of rain there, so it makes it beautiful. People think of the south, they think of big, heavy reds, but you have some absolutely gorgeous whites.
Correct, and even the reds are more into the elegance than let's say, the power, or the gemmy elements of the flavors. So I would say that we are really lucky, because even with the current climate change, we are quite advantaged, because on the contrary that in other area, we are experiencing the possibility to go in, let's say, a little bit up, like in 900 meters, 1,000 meters, and even discovering new opportunities. So the climate is definitely what makes our area. The climate and the soils and this small circle of hills and mountains that, in a way, circumvent Irpinia. This is what makes really unique our winemaking experience.
I have one question here it's actually in the chat box, but it's from Samuel Rowe, and he asked, what is the average temperature during the summer months?
It's interesting. I mean, in the summer months it gets pretty hot. It can get up to 35, 37 degrees Celsius. But what's important for us is not really the high temperature, is the temperature gap between day and night, and the fact that during the night you have, which is the case, in the night you always go to 15 to 20 degrees, even in the most dramatic and very hot summers. And this temperature gap allows the grapes, the vines, to breathe in the night. So what makes really a difference is the temperature gaps, and also the fact that in particular at the beginning of the spring, you still have a quite cool climate, very fresh, which helps the first phases of the growing of the vines, of the grape, let's say, to be in a fresh and clean, also in terms of sickness, environment.
Okay. Antonio De Spirito, do you have any questions for Antonio about what we've been talking about Irpinia and the changes?
Sì, la faccio in italiano, poi tu magari...
Sì.
La mia domanda era, io ho assaggiato le novità di Feudi di San Gregorio 2 anni fa, Feudi Studi. Ho assaggiato 3 versioni di Fiano e 3 di Greco. Mi sono piaciute molto, tra l'altro.
Grazie.
Volevo sapere se avete intenzione di farle anche con altri vitigni, di estendere questi studi.
Allora, intanto grazie. Gli studi nascono proprio per l'Irpinia, quindi l'idea è di continuare a fare tra le 2 e 3 versioni di Greco, di Fiano e di Taurasi tutti gli anni, negli anni, diciamo, migliori. Qualche volta ne facciamo 1, qualche volta 2. L'idea di questi vini è proprio approfondire un aspetto che secondo me si aggiunge a quelli che abbiamo detto fino adesso, che è la diversità delle sottozone, che ovviamente in Irpinia non si è investigata come si può essere investigato nella zona del Barolo, nella zona del Barbaresco, in Borgogna, eccetera. E quindi noi vogliamo dare un contributo su questo. Stiamo lavorando anche su un aglianico che non è un Taurasi, quindi a 1000 metri, nella zona di Candriano, che è appena fuori, appena sopra la DOCG, però le varietà sono queste 3. Noi nella Falanghina, che pure ne produciamo tanto, non abbiamo la conoscenza, perché non è un territorio dove noi siamo stabiliti. Magari il potenziale c'è anche, ma noi non conosciamo tutte le sottozone con quella stessa cultura che abbiamo onestamente in Irpinia.
Antonio was, to the rest of you who
Do I translate? You want me to translate?
If you could, yeah. He was talking about a line of wines called Feudi Studi. And these
this is the line, it's a small production line, up to 2,000 bottles that we started in 2012. We do, of each of the varietals, Fiano, Greco, and Aglianico in the Taurasi area, we do 2 to 3 wines every year. And what we try to do with these wines is to emphasize the difference, the diversity within each DOCG, because Irpinia is definitely the potential of Burgundy or Barolo or many other areas where the subzone have been investigated. The only reason why we haven't been investigated the subzone enough is that we didn't have enough time and enough people working on to make the wines to do it. So Feudi Studies is a project that each year tries to compare same vintage, 3 areas of Greco, 3 areas of Fiano, and 3 areas of Aglianico. And we'll keep doing it. And it's quite, for us, it's an educational project, but it's also a very nice project to engage sommelier or the experts, but even the drinkers that like to try.
Okay. I have several questions which we'll get to in a minute. I'll ask the first one here, and then I talked with your importer in the United States, which is the Terlata Wine Group in Lake Bluff, Illinois, and I appreciate their help in getting some people to attend today. And they suggested that we taste a few wines. So in just a minute, I'll have you go through a tasting of just the Greco di Tufo, the Fiano di Avellino, and the Taurasi, the 3 DOCGs. First question is from my friend Jessica Tan in Singapore. Hello, Jessica. And she says, can you please explain the soil types in Irpinia? Also, what does that do for each of the native grapes there?
Again, you have a big diversity. So there is no one unique soil. Mostly these soils are of volcanic origin, but they are also, they're quite changing from area to area. But overall, Aglianico area is made of volcanic ash, so the soil is really like ashes, one over the other, different layers of ashes, and so it's a typical volcanic soil, but of relatively old build up. So it's a soil that gives more elegance rather than the typical just minerality to the wine. So you have elegance and minerality together. And generally, Aglianico has this characteristic, in particular from Taurasi town up. From Taurasi town down, Taurasi town is at about 450 meters above sea level. You have a more clay limestone soil. In Fiano area, you have more clay and limestone soil. Greco is quite a mess because you have chalky soil, you have volcanic soil, you have limestone, you have everything. And that's what makes Greco unique, is that on this combination of soil, where even within each vineyard the soils change dramatically, this varietal really express its unique characteristics. So in general, there is a common element mostly for Aglianico and Greco, that is minerality, definitely. And that's, I think it's the preeminent element of our soils.
Okay. Why don't we go through, Antonio? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes. Non voglio rimangare su certe polemiche del passato, perché insomma lasciano sempre il tempo che trovano, ma la faccio in italiano, poi tu magari...
Sì.
La mia domanda era, io ho assaggiato le novità di Feudi di San Gregorio 2 anni fa, Feudi Studi. Ho assaggiato 3 versioni di Fiano e 3 di Greco. Mi sono piaciute molto, tra l'altro.
Grazie.
Volevo sapere se avete intenzione di farle anche con altri vitigni, di estendere questi studi.
Allora, intanto grazie. Gli studi nascono proprio per l'Irpinia, quindi l'idea è di continuare a fare tra le 2 e i 3 versioni di Greco, di Fiano e di Taurasi tutti gli anni, negli anni diciamo migliori, qualche volta ne facciamo 1, qualche volta 2. L'idea di questi vini è proprio approfondire un aspetto che secondo me si aggiunge a quelli che abbiamo detto fino adesso, che è la diversità delle sottozone, che ovviamente in Irpinia non si è investigata come si può essere investigato nella zona del Barolo, nella zona del Barbaresco, in Borgogna, eccetera. E quindi noi vogliamo dare un contributo su questo. Stiamo lavorando anche su un Aglianico che non è un Taurasi, quindi a 1000 metri, nella zona di Candriano, che è appena fuori, appena sopra la DOCG, però le varietà sono queste tre. Noi nella Falanghina, che pure ne produciamo tanto, non abbiamo la conoscenza, perché non è un territorio dove noi siamo stabiliti. Magari il potenziale c'è anche, ma noi non conosciamo tutte le sottozone con quella stessa cultura che abbiamo onestamente in Irpinia.
Antonio was, to the rest of you who
Do I
don't...
translate? You want me to translate?
If you could, yeah. He was talking about a special line of wines called Feudi di. And these
this is a line, a small production line, up to 2,000 bottles that we started in 2012. We do, of each of the varietals, Fiano, Greco, and Aglianico in the Taurasi area, we do 2 to 3 wines every year. And what we try to do with these wines is to emphasize the difference, the diversity within each DOCG, because Irpinia is definitely the potential of Burgundy or Barolo or many other areas where the subzone have been investigated. The only reason why we haven't been investigated the subzone enough is that we didn't have enough time and enough people working on to make the wines to do it. So Feudi Studies is a project that each year tries to compare same vintage, 3 areas of Greco, 3 areas of Fiano, and 3 areas of Aglianico. And we'll keep doing it. And it's quite, for us, it's an educational project, but it's also a very nice project to engage sommelier or the experts, but even the drinkers that like to try.
Okay. I have several questions, which we'll get to in a minute. I'll ask the first one here. And then I talked with your importer in the United States, which is the Terlata Wine Group in Lake Bluff, Illinois. And I appreciate their help in getting some people to attend today. And they suggested that we taste a few wines. So in just a minute, I'll have you go through a tasting of just the Greco di Tufo, the Fiano di Avellino, and the Taurasi, the 3 DOCGs. First question is from my friend Jessica Tan in Singapore. Hello, Jessica. And she says, can you please explain the soil types in Irpinia? Also, what does that do for each of the native grapes there?
Again, you have a big diversity. So there is no one unique soil. Mostly these soils are of volcanic origin, but they are also, they're quite changing from area to area. But overall, Aglianico area is made of volcanic ash. So the soil is really like ashes, one over the other, different layers of ashes. And so it's a typical volcanic soil, but of relatively old build up. So it's a soil that gives more elegance rather than the typical just minerality to the wine. So you have elegance and minerality together. And generally, Aglianico has this characteristic, in particular from Taurasi town up. From Taurasi town down, Taurasi town is at about 450 meters above sea level. You have a more clay limestone soil. In Fiano area, you have more clay and limestone soil. Greco is quite a mess because you have chalky soil, you have volcanic soil, you have limestone, you have everything. And that's what makes Greco unique, is that on this combination of soil, where even within each vineyard the soils change dramatically, this varietal really express its unique characteristics. So in general, there is a common element, mostly for Aglianico and Greco, that is minerality, definitely. And that's, I think it's the preeminent element of our soils.
Okay. Why don't we go through, Antonio? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes. Non voglio rimangare su certe polemiche del passato perché insomma lasciano sempre il tempo che trovano, ma volevo sapere la tua azienda quanto è autosufficiente per quanto riguarda le uve, cioè i vigneti di proprietà e le uve acquistate, e se avete intenzione di allargare in altre regioni le vostre aziende.
No, noi abbiamo più o meno l'autoproduzione su Greco, Fiano e Aglianico copre il 60%. Abbiamo 300 ettari. Noi ogni anno più o meno compriamo tra i 10 e i 20 ettari di ex conferenti. Poi abbiamo un ulteriore 35%, noi abbiamo un 5% che ogni anno cambia, perché poi abbiamo un ulteriore 35% che sono contratti di 10 anni con conferenti. Lei è stato in Irpinia, l'Irpinia ha ancora tanti piccoli agricoltori, no?
Sì, infatti la polemica a cui facevo riferimento era quello che voi voi grandi produttori, poi imponete il costo delle uve, insomma,
Sì,
quella famosa...
ma non è manco sbagliato quello che è la polemica, cioè è anche giusto dire che un Greco di Tufo, l'uva non dovrebbe costare €1, ma dovrebbe costarne 3. Allo stesso tempo noi tutti dovremmo essere capaci di vendere un Greco a €15 e non a 7 o a 6 o a 5. Cioè, purtroppo, diciamo, la polemica ci sta perché produrre l'uva Greco, ed è il motivo per cui molti dei nostri conferenti poi ci vendono il terreno e a noi costa 3 volte di più lavorarlo, quindi è un circolo un po' vizioso perché le rese del Greco sono molto basse. Noi abbiamo cominciato questo programma di 10 anni dove i prezzi un pochino aumentano tutti gli anni, ma è vero, cioè oggi i prezzi sono troppo bassi, ma sono anche il riflesso purtroppo di una difficoltà ancora presente a portare questi vini, diciamo, ai prezzi giusti. Quindi questo è un po' il problema. Io mi rendo conto che, perché noi per esempio in altre zone abbiamo investito nella Basilicata, che ha problematiche un po' simili, però per esempio adesso recentemente 3 anni fa abbiamo investito a Bolgheri, una piccola azienda che 15 ettari, è completamente diverso il profilo, no? Però è una viticoltura più facile paradossalmente, cioè, e costa 6 volte di più. Quindi il problema molto spesso è quanto siamo in grado di portare queste denominazioni dove devono stare. E io credo che c'è un impegno da parte della filiera in generale, da parte dei produttori, di trasmettere, se riusciamo a fare questa operazione, ai nostri conferenti i benefici, no, di questo miglioramento. Quindi il vero obiettivo deve essere di alzare i prezzi di vendita dei prodotti.
Antonio, Capaldo, can you give us a quick translation for those of us that don't, the rest of the...
Yeah, super quick, super quick. I mean, he was asking me how much we self-produce, and we basically self-produce up to 60%, around 60%, and then the rest, most of the remainder, we have long-term sourcing contracts with growers. In Irpinia, you still have small growers that still own a very small portion of land, and they live out of what they grow. And he was asking if, I mean, basically the prices where we buy the grapes are not as high as in other areas, and but also it's true that the wines are not sold at the same price they should be sold in terms of quality. So we still have a work to do to make the value chain grow in terms of size and in terms of value to be shared with the growers.
Okay, let's make sure that we have enough time for. I have a few more questions we want to get across.
So basically, the two wines for me, they are perfect examples of a side-by-side tasting. Now, for me, it's difficult. Of course, it's somehow difficult to have a comprehensive understanding of what Irpinia is without tasting both these wines together. They represent, if you want, the male and the female, the elegance and the power of what Irpinia wines can be. Greco is Greco here. Greco is a wine that has. You see, we are twins. Greco is a wine that has definitely more there is more in the mouth than in the nose in general. No? So you actually, when you put your nose in a glass of Greco, you in particular if it's young, you don't smell many different flavors. There is no aromaticity. It's quite closed. So you don't know what to expect. And this is what makes this unusual white varietal really unique around the world, is that when you go in the mouth, then it becomes a very powerful wine with a big entry, with this freshness. Wines for me, but of course it goes well also on salty dishes like mozzarella, like raw fish. So Greco for me, it's really what it's the most iconic wine of a unique area that is Irpinia.
I like that quote. I like that quote about being a quasi red.
Yeah, it's a quasi red. It's by the way, it's a red. It's a white varietal having tannins. These tannins are inertial, so they are not evident in the taste like you have on the reds, but they are tannins. So it's a varietal with really this big power. On the other hand, what the Greco doesn't express in the nose, the Fiano does. So the Fiano is rich in all the primary flavors. It's a grape that condenses even in the flavors all the terroir history, hazelnuts, peaches, all the typical elements of the terroir. They are like when you smell a Fiano glass. And then when you taste it, it's definitely more balanced, big body as well, long finish, but definitely not this masculine, strong, and quite dark side of the Greco. It's definitely a lighter wine, lighter not in terms of body, but in terms of light, in terms of is a less dark wine than Greco. Greco for me is really extreme, and sometimes if you taste it with a glass, with a dark glass, you may really think it's it's almost a red, like Piedioso, like a red with not particularly heavy. Both wines, they have something in common. They have in common the fact that they come from Irpinia, of course, but they also have in common the fact that they age very well, which is not that common in white wines, although we are already discovering the white wine's aging potential, luckily. But these two wines are iconic of how well white wines can age. So I think that you can drink really beautifully a Greco or a Fiano that are 10 years old without any issue. So that's where I think we have something to say as an area, not just the quality, but also our way to white wines that enjoy this great longevity.
I would agree. And you must get this question all the time because you see it written all the time on articles and Facebook chats and things, but which one ages longer, Greco di Tufo or Fiano di Avellino?
I have an answer now. I mean, it took me some time because generally everybody thinks it's Fiano.
Right.
Because Fiano definitely on average ages better. So if you open a Fiano after 5 years, 7 years, 8 years, it's good. It's good. It's good. It's even better than at the first year. Greco ages better in marvelous vintages. Otherwise, it ages worse. So Greco ages well up to 5 years. Then in very spectacular vintages like 2018, like 2013, I remember 2009, 2010, it ages spectacular, better than Fiano. That's what I would answer to this tricky question.
Look closely, you'll see this is 2013, so I'm not in any hurry to drink it. So.
You see, you have a good vintage with you.
I remember that vintage. So that's the best answer I've heard because you hear that all the time, and a lot of people are diplomatic and they say, well, they both age great, but I've always looked for Greco, but your answer is the most complete, and that's great. So now, two other things. What are the current vintages? The 2008?
Current is we just released 2019.
Okay, so in the United States, they still have 2018, I imagine.
18 in the United States. But 19 is coming in the fall, I think.
Okay, I know we talked about it when I met you last time, and it's a spectacular vintage, 2018, right?
2018 for me, 2019 was very good, but 2018 was at something more. So I think 2018 it's out of the last 3 or 4, it's probably the best.
Okay.
I would say it's a simpler wine in the sense that it's a wine that has definitely less body, less length, less longevity, but it has an explosive aromaticity when you smell it, when you drink it. So it's a pleasant wine that gives you joy, and that comes from the grape. That's why we never tried, but there are producers who did, and you both know better than me. And there are examples of producers that age Falanghina, that are doing Reserva out of Falanghina. There are good examples, but we prefer, for the moment at least, to emphasize really the primary characteristics of the grape. The grape is all about joy for me. That's the secret of the wine itself, is that we try to transmit really the characteristic of the grape in the wine. Now, I don't know you, what you think, Tom. I know I try to ask you. You know, there are producers in the Falanghina area that try to make it a more, a less aperitif wine, a more, meal wine. What's your view? Because I prefer to separate Falanghina from Fiano and Greco anyway. But what do you think?
I know the producers you're talking about. I won't mention names, but many of them are in Caserta, much further north and closer to the sea, and they with that saltiness they get and the minerality, and some of them will age these wines in barrels, and it is a very different style of wine. It's not that easy drinking fun wine, as you call it. So I certainly like those wines, but they are very, very different, and they're not typical of what, because your Falanghina comes from Benevento, see?
Yes, Benevento in the Contrada Ponte, which is at 550 meters mostly. So it's really in the Benevento area. And honestly, we know the area, but we have not been there for 30 years. We have been there for like 15, 18 years. So we are still learning. There are areas that are different also there, but definitely another difference of Falanghina versus the other two, it's that the Sannio with the Benevento province area is much more homogeneous than what Fiano and Greco is. That's my perception. That's why we do a single vineyard Falanghina, but the difference between the single vineyard Falanghina and, let's say, the classic Falanghina is not the same that we can have between the Cutizzi, which is the single vineyard Greco, and the Greco classic, or the Pietracalda, which is the single vineyard Fiano, and the Fiano. So, and that's why also we don't think for the moment of bringing Feudi to the idea in the Falanghina area.
Okay. One thing I want to say, Antonio, is that, and I hate to say this because I don't want to lose you again, but we're seeing you sideways. I don't know if you can fix that, and don't do too much to lose the picture, but you're on the side now. You're not sitting straight up.
And again on the side.
Yeah. There we go. Perfect. Okay. Antonio Capaldo, I have a question from Lars Light about, we go back to Greco and Fiano, about your favorite food pairings with those two wines.
So for me, Greco, because I'm in love with mozzarella, no? Who isn't, by the way? For me, Greco and mozzarella go very well. No? And also I like Greco with the Italian version of sushi, which is marinated raw fish, which for me is perfect. Greco goes well with pasta as well. Fiano, Fiano, I like it with chicken, I like it with fish. It's quite versatile, Fiano. Greco, I would rather go with more extreme tastes.
I know that having been to Irpinia and Campania so often, bacala is my favorite seafood there. Which do you prefer with bacala, Greco or Fiano?
Both go well, but with bacala, because of the saltiness, I like Greco. If you pair it by, let's say, by harmony, I prefer Greco personally. Okay.
I have a question here from Andrea Petrini. Antonio Di Spirito, do you see that in the chat box?
Yes, but I talked about already.
Okay, all right, very good.
No, io volevo sapere invece, in questo periodo così di contingenza con il coronavirus, tutti prevedono un periodaccio per le vendite e quindi pensano tutti a come utilizzare poi i vini, se stoccarli e venderli magari invecchiati oppure con la distillazione. E dunque, qui chiaramente la risposta dipende anche dalle dimensioni dell'azienda. Io credo che voi non abbiate così tanti problemi per lo stoccaggio, però mi piaceva sapere il tuo...
No, allora, in realtà, per me la distillazione è una disgrazia, no? Quindi non la voglio nemmeno per gente che ci lavora, conferenti, aziende che lavorano un anno per fare il vino, proprio non bisogna neanche pensarla. È evidente che nel sistema Italia ci può stare la distillazione come una percentuale, perché nei grandi numeri il problema di avere tanto vino da tavola ancora l'anno prossimo una quota di distillazione secondo me sarà inevitabile e probabilmente necessaria. Per le aziende che producono qualità o comunque i territori, parliamo di territori più che le aziende, territori di qualità, la distillazione non è un'opzione e per me neanche la vendemmia verde, perché buttare, cioè se lo fai per migliorare la qualità benissimo, ma non verde che ti danno i soldi, la devi fare prima. Cioè noi devo dire stiamo partendo con alcuni nostri conferenti con l'idea di aumentare un pochino il prezzo e fargli ridurre la resa, ma per una questione qualitativa. Pierpaolo Sir che sta mettendo un protocollo, tu lo conosci, cerchiamo di approfittare di quest'anno, siccome poi giustamente si paga a peso, cerchiamo di non pagare a peso, magari quest'anno paghiamo a ettaro e facciamo in modo che se fa un po' meno si fa più buono. Però questo risolve un piccolo problema. Noi andremo a stoccare, ma per due motivi, e chiaramente c'è un problema di spazio, perché non è che non, cioè voglio dire, più grande sei, più grande devi stoccare, quindi non sei mai grande abbastanza. Noi andremo a stoccare e credo cercheremo di sfruttare l'opportunità per uscire con la 2019 ancora più avanti, la 20 più avanti, in modo da fare un lavoro che qualche piccolo produttore riesce a fare obiettivamente meglio di noi, cercare di portare l'attenzione su quanto questi vini sono buoni un anno dopo la vendemmia, obiettivamente. Ci proviamo per la contingenza. Poi io ho proposto una cosa che spero passi, cioè ho chiesto come parziale aiuto di dire tu hai il taglio d'annata al 15%, portiamo il taglio d'annata anche al 25%, su varietà come Greco e Fiano non avrà impatto qualitativo, però tu ti porti, se te lo fai per 2 o 3 anni, recuperi, magari arriva un'annata brutta, questa sembra un'annata buona, no? Magari arriva un'annata brutta, tu lo recuperi piano piano. Per me alzare il taglio d'annata di 10 punti su queste varietà non è una tragedia, no? Quindi io spero, sono un po' un mix di cose. Noi comunque sì, in questo momento noi abbiamo una presenza un po' più multicanale, ma comunque siamo al 60% in meno delle vendite, 60 se non 70, quindi stiamo tutti soffrendo.
You give us a quick translation, Antonio.
Yeah, the translation is, Antonio was asking me, what do you do with the excess wine that now is going to be in your winery because of the crisis? There are different, people think of different measures. No, there is Italian, some people say that they're going to give a contribution for destroying the wine, so distillation of the wine. Yeah. Our idea is, of course, there's not going to be any distillation of the wine after so much effort to do it, but we'll stock the wine, try to release 2020 a little bit later, and try to push more and more into the knowledge of consumers that our white wines can age well and can be drunk 1 year after the harvest is even better than 6 months after the harvest. So at the end of the day, we are going to try to extend the 2019 vintage on the market as much as possible, hoping, of course, that it's going to be a 3-month crisis and not a 12-month crisis. Otherwise, we will see.
Yes, fingers crossed, as they say. So, and I that's a great question, Antonio, and a great answer, Antonio. And I think that if we have to make positives out of the situation that you have now, and here's one positive is that you said you can get the message across to consumers, your customers and wholesalers and importers that yes, these wines are going to hold. These are not simple white wines to drink within 6 months. They will age.
Yeah, you know, there is one thing that there are people, I'm not personally, my family, you know, doesn't come from the vineyards background, agricultural background. But personally now I grew up with Feudi. I'm 43 and Feudi is 30, now is 35. So we actually almost the same age. And I grew up with my family working with Feudi. So what I was saying is that I think the people from the wine, the agriculture in general, they are less scared by this kind of crisis. I shared these thoughts with people that have been from Angelo Gaia to Alessio Planeta to Marco Caprai that has been really working on the vineyards all their lives.
Right.
And they all share these thoughts that at the end of the day, we are used to be under the sky. So every year is different. And we are used to crisis because Italy lived in a crazy crisis in the middle of the 80s for wine. So at the end of the day, we don't want to look foolish by staying positive, but we try to be because we have a great harvest to produce this year. That's what we are all focusing on.
Okay. Just before we talk about the red wines, 2 things. Number one, it would be a mistake if I didn't mention that when the situation is over with and people can travel again and the borders are open, And if they visit Feudi di San Gregorio, you have a spectacular restaurant called Marana, which is a 1 Michelin star, correct?
Yeah, it is. We actually totally restructured the restaurant with the perfect timing because we opened in November and now we're closed. But and that's, I think, the biggest shame is that there was a growing trend of enotourism, so traveling for wine, traveling to visit wineries. That's the biggest thing about this crisis for me. It's not just sales in restaurants, which at some extent will recover, but the fact that traveling for visiting places for wine will take a little bit longer, I think, to recover. So we have a Michelin star restaurant inside the winery. We actually need to reconquer because we have been closed for 1 year. The guide did not review us, so we hope to reconquer the Michelin star this year if they do the guide. Right. But we have been holding the star for 10 years. And most importantly, we also restructured some internal areas of the winery. So it's worth the visit because it's a very nice winery, as there are many around Italy. And I really hope that US experts, US wine lovers, US curious tasters will start traveling soon again, because this was is a trend that we have been seeing growing, and we enjoy that because it helped a lot to create knowledge of the wines, in particular for regions that have not been established, like Tuscany or Piedmont. So for us, it was vital to have enoturism, to have ambassadors then coming back to the US.
I would agree, and it is an important step. I've had lunch and dinner there, and it's a spectacular, just the design, the architecture of it, and just the steel and the way the tables are designed. Everything is just beautiful, and the food is fantastic. And then you step outside, and you have this magnificent view of the area in Sopra Serpico. So one other thing I want to mention before we talk about the reds is we have a question here from Francesco D'Agostino, and he talks about your sparkling wine, the Double, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. When did you start with that, and how important is that in your production?
It's today represent like 5% of our production, but it's incredibly important in terms of the power of the message, and it's also important in terms of the vision of the winery. So Double, just for people who don't know it, because they are not available everywhere. So Double is a name of a project. We started with Anselm Selos, a champagne maker, but the idea was Double was like double, like putting together our indigenous indigenous varietals with the traditional champenoise method. So this blend, this encounter was the idea of Double. And we started with 3 Metodo Classico, Falanghina, Greco, and Aglianico Rosé. Then we added 2 Dosage Zero. We released them 3 years ago, called Double S-like selection. So these are 5 sparkling. And we made a massive disaster when we started. So because we didn't know how to manage this method, we didn't know how the varietals would react to this. So we have been struggling, we have been making mistakes. And that, I think, was great because first of all, it showed the winery had a vision, but it showed also that it had the determination to fix it. It was my uncle at the time, and then me, when I joined in 2009, we were still thinking whether we continue or not doing it, because there are more hurdles than pros at the moment. And luckily we did, because over time then we found our way, and I think these sparkling wines are really iconic and spectacular. So on one end, it's a sign of our soul as a winery, and secondly, I think they show the potential of our varietals even more. Minerality, freshness, structure, all 3 of them, even Falanghina in that case, even if Greco and Aglianico even more, they show the capability also to express themselves in a stunning way in the sparkling, in the Metodo Classico methodology. So at the end of the day, something that was a visionary idea and was executed with a lot of difficulties and mistakes at the beginning became one of the flagship of what the winery is, what the area is, and what the potential can be.
Great. Let's move to your red wines, and of course you have several. And let's start with the most famous red wine from Irpinia, which is Taurasi.
Yes, I get the bottle.
Okay. Okay.
The good thing about, we have many red wines, but the good thing about it is that almost all of them are made of Aglianico. So it's actually one varietal. It's quite dull, no? But it's one varietal, different wines. Why we do this? Because we have many parcels, approximately 150 parcels in the Aglianico area, so we can differentiate. So our, let's call it entry-level Aglianico is called Rubrato. It's an Aglianico 100%. We don't use any oak. Just to try to explain, because there is a wisdom, conventional idea that Aglianico is a rustic wine. You need to wait 40 years in order to drink it. That's false. Mostly, if it's harvested at the right time, which is challenging, because Aglianico you need to harvest beginning of November sometimes. So you need really to pay attention to harvest at the right moment. You don't need to be too afraid if it's raining that you're going to lose the harvest. If you harvest at the right time, it's one of the sweetest grape. So even without oak, even without waiting 20 years, it's a very drinkable and enjoyable wine. And that's the purpose of Rubrato, which comes from the broader area of Aglianico, not just the Taurasi subzone. And then in the Taurasi area, we produce Taurasi DOCG, which is like Barolo for Nebbiolo. It's the DOCG of the Aglianico, doing at least 3 years of aging. Then we have a Taurasi Riserva Piano di Montevergine, which is a single vineyard. Here the years of aging go up to 4. Oh, you see, it's your favorite wine, by the way.
Assolutamente, sì.
And we go further, because in Taurasi now we are with 2014 vintage, so we don't do 3 years, we do at least 5. And in Piano di Montevergine we are now with 2013 vintage, so we don't do 4, we do 6 to 7 years before releasing the wine. And then still in the Taurasi area, another wine that we produce is called Serpico. It's another single vineyard coming from 4 hectares of Pre-Phylloxera vines that are quite surprising, 3 meters tall. It's a small garden where you can see how this traditional viticulture was, that you actually were growing the vines over at the tree level, because you could grow on the soils vegetables and maximize the productivity, and you harvested with ladders. And still this vineyard called Vigneto da Re, so vineyard from the king, is where we do Serpico. We still harvest with the traditional ladders. Serpico and Piano di Montevergine are therefore cru, while Taurasi, it's our classic interpretation of the area. We produce around 4,000 to 5,000 cases, so it's a relatively big production of it. And we source the grapes all the way from Taurasi at 450 meters up to Castelfranci at 800 meters above sea level. So it's a wine made generally on high elevation. Generally, it's all volcanic soil, mostly made of volcanic ashes, as I was saying. And the classic Taurasi has this capability to pair, on one end, the power of the fruit with red berries, with rose, which is typical of a good Aglianico, with this fresh opening in the mouth, with the elegance, the depth, and the the complexity in the mouth that comes both from the aging and from the grape itself. And when you think about aging, we are still not at the end of our process of learning. As I said at the beginning, Mastro Berardino started, we have Taurasis from the 20s. So they have a story, but at the same time, I think one producer or two, they cannot make the story by themselves. So luckily, it's now 10 to 15 years that there are a community of producers that are studying different ways of aging Aglianico, different ways of blending different aging methodology. And I think we are improving, on average, our knowledge of how Aglianico reacts. So the tradition in our area was chestnut oak. Now the people trying concrete. We're trying chestnut as well, where you mostly use large oak, Slavonian oak. We used to use a lot of barriques because there was the time where everybody was using barriques. So we are in the history of Taurasi. I think you see the history of our area, but you also see the history of the Italian winemaking industry in general, that in the beginning of the 90s was using too much barrique and too much oak a little bit everywhere, if you accept, of course, the big names that have been consistent with their quality, but they were trying to over-oak the wines, to do too much of a show-off, which in particular on grape with Aglianico, you don't need to do anything. You just need to harvest at the right time, treat it gently, extract not 100% of the fruit, because otherwise it's difficult then to handle it, but extract anyway a good chunk of it, and then age it the time needed to balance, not to try to put more on the wines. That's why we use used Slavonian oak, used barriques. We don't use new oak anymore, mostly.
Okay, let's talk. We're talking a little bit about the oak aging there. So we talked about the ageability of the whites, which may surprise some people, but of course they expect the reds and Taurasi to age a long time. So what's the aging potential, and can you give example of some of your best vintages?
I drank last week our 94, which was our second vintage. Our first vintage was 93, and 94 was the first vintage that Taurasi became a DOCG, and it was drinking really beautifully. And in particular, I mean, for the first 10 or 15 years, the wine improves. Then it stays and it becomes more and more charming. So it's not easy to have a wine improving for 15 years continuously for me. So there are some wines that you can drink after 30, 40 years, but they don't improve over time. Taurasi does, because it has so much to give. And then it stays, which then, of course, the wine changes. It doesn't have the same characteristics of power that it has at the beginning, but it stays. And I think 30 years easy, but you have to, of course, you have to love aged wines, because it's not the same as drinking a wine that is 15 years old. So I think it has these two opportunities for aging. In the window 10 to 15 years, it's an incredible wine. It has already aged quite well, and it's showing really its full potential. Then if you wait longer, 30 years, but there are some bottles of 50 or 60 years that still drink beautifully, then you go into a new story where the wine still behaves very well, and then there is, of course, all the charm of opening a bottle that is sometimes older than us, or very old, or recalling us a very specific anniversary. So, and the wine still drinks beautifully. So the aging potential is very, very high. It's one of the highest I've been experiencing.
Yes, and the current vintage on the Taurasi versus the...
It's 2014. In the US, we have 13 of Taurasi and the Taurasi Riserva. In Italy, we just released 14 of the Taurasi. The Riserva 14, we are going to release in September.
Okay, we're going to go a little bit over the 12 o'clock here in Chicago, but over the hour because we had a little delay. But Antonio Di Spirito, do you have another question for Antonio?
Sì, volevo sapere se ci sono in programma altre acquisizioni fuori dalla Campania.
No, stiamo bene come stiamo. No, abbiamo fatto anche troppo, perché c'è tanta, veramente la mia famiglia, non venendo dalla tradizione viticola, cioè, ho tentato anche di portare questa idea di curiosità, di esplorare diversi territori, però c'è tanto da fare, le aziende, ci si mette tanto tempo per farle, le aziende del vino, no? Il tempo è stato il fattore che si sottovaluta sempre, pure se te lo dicono, no? Nel vino il tempo veramente ci vuole. Io l'ho un po' sottovalutata all'inizio e onestamente ci vuole, e siccome abbiamo investito in Puglia e in Basilicata, in due realtà molto belle che c'erano prima, dovevamo lavorarci. In Puglia c'è questa azienda biodinamica a Castel del Monte che bisogna fare delle cose lì, e poi a Bolgheri abbiamo investito 3 anni fa, va bene così, abbiamo abbastanza. Poi abbiamo queste partnership perché abbiamo investito con Pierpaolo Sirca e la sua famiglia in Friuli, ma sono loro a condurre, quindi loro hanno l'esperienza. Poi abbiamo fatto un piccolo investimento sempre con un socio di maggioranza sull'Etna. Però noi, i nostri territori restano e sono già sufficienti: il sud, Campania, Basilicata e Puglia, e Bolgheri, dove siamo andati anche per l'amore, per quella libertà di poter sperimentare i blend, in particolare nei rossi, che è qualcosa che un po' ci manca al sud, e quindi poter completare anche la nostra gamma di prodotti con dei prodotti con una maggiore vocazione all'export, obiettivamente, oltre che sperimentare l'idea che in cantina potessi fare un blend diverso rispetto a quello che poi viviamo nei nostri territori monovarietali.
A quick translation for us?
Yeah, it just asking me if we were investing in other areas outside Campania, and my answer was no. We haven't been investing in Puglia, Basilicata, and Tuscany, which are already 3 regions, and I underestimated the complexity of building up a winery and the wine brand. It takes time, so we have these 3 new ventures. Even if Basilisco and Ogni Sole in Puglia, they have been pre-existent, but we are reshaping them. It takes time, so we will be focusing on them and not invest in other.
Okay. One last question I have is that, you know, I have to congratulate you, compliment you on, you know, the work that you've done to promote in not just Feudi di San Gregorio, but Irpinia and Campania in general. And we know that, you know, from export markets, I know America, of course, very, very well, that still, you know, the wines of Campania are not as well known as they should be. That's starting to change, but there's a lot of work to do. So what do you think that you and your colleagues in Irpinia and Campania have to do to make the wines better known?
The obvious answer is open bottles. So open bottles on the market with the people that make our opinion leaders. Opinion leaders are, of course, journalists, but also very curious sommelier, very curious collectioners. Luckily, there is an increasing curiosity in areas and in varietals that people didn't hear about. So I think on that, we should push more and more and more. We should try to do events in the US more often. And at the same time, we should also try to be a little bit simpler in the way we communicate, in the sense that we need really to push this appellation strongly. Italian wine labels are complicated to understand for the international consumer. We need to push the appellation very, very strong and direct. We don't need to create many. Now, Feudi Studi is an example of an intellectual project, but I want to call my wine Greco di Tufo, and I wanted this to be very, very clear for everybody. And I think we should all focus, rather than on the producer, on the appellation. And then if you're larger, if you're smaller, then you will benefit large pie, size of the, share of the pie, or smaller share of the pie. So we need to continue traveling, bringing bottles, etc. And then I think we have an incredible opportunity by these new digital means, because there is a generation of consumers that really learn very quickly about new things, and they are open to travel. So we should try to create digital content that is appealing to them, and then bringing them to make the physical experience in our winery. So it's the old ways, let's say, opening bottles and hospitality, but I think we should try to be quite aggressive in investing also in new technology in doing.
Okay, thank you. That's a wonderful answer, and it's as far as travel, let's hope that I can travel to Campania soon, and Antonio,
I hope so.
And you can come to the United States soon, and we can all see each other soon. So, but Antonio Di Spirito, grazie a tutti.
Grazie.
Thank you.
Antonio,
I apologize again for the connection.
Oh no, it's all right. That's all right. It's it all worked out. So, grazie per l'opportunità. Ci vediamo
Grazie a voi.
a molto presto.
A presto.
Molto
Ciao, grazie.
presto. Okay.